Good morning. We're learning as a We're starting the new parak on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Paras Chatas. Big mission. Paras Chatas Shesar B'chutz Mikisa. A paraduma. That's what we call a Paras Chatas. Shesar B'chutz Mikisa that was burnt outside of its hole. The Gemara is going to explain where was the place that it was supposed to be burnt. V'chein Sar HaMishtaleach. The Sar L'Azazel Shehikr B'chutz, that you were makrav outside of the Beis Hamikdash. The Sar Mishtaleach wasn't supposed to be burnt. It wasn't supposed to be shechted at all. It was supposed to be thrown off a cliff. Potter. Both of them are potter if you do it b'chutz. Shenemar Al Pesach Hayom Mayid Lo Heviu. The Torah says if you didn't bring it to the Pesach Hayom Mayid, Kol She'ein Roy Lo Pesach Hayom Mayid Ein Chayav. You only chayiv for shchitas chutz and halah b'chutz on something that was supposed to go into the Beis Hamikdash, and neither the paraduma is supposed to be burnt outside of Shalosh Machnes, all the way outside of Yerushalayim, and the Sar Mishtaleach was not supposed to be nikrav at all. It was supposed to be thrown off a mountain again outside of Yerushalayim. But they don't have any din that if you mark of them b'chutz that you chayiv akravas chutz. Now we're going to talk about a whole bunch of kabbanos that are puzzle. Hariveya, an animal that was born a person. Hanirva, that was a person was born it. Va'amuksa, that was set aside for avodah zarah. Va'neva, that was worshipped. Va'mechir, was sold in exchange for a dog. Va'esnan, or it was used as payment for a zayna. Va'klayim, it came from interbreeding. Va'treifa, if it's a treifa, that means it has a flaw in it that it can't live. V'yetzedayfen was born by cesarean. Shekrivim b'chutz, any of these things that you're makro b'chutz, potter. They're all potter. Shenema lifnei mishkan Hashem. Kol she'en roy lavoi lifnei mishkan Hashem. Whatever's not roy to come in front of the mishkan Hashem, ein chayav lav. You're not chayav. All these things are things that these are flaws and not kedushai. That they're not psulei b'kodesh. The psul is even before they come to the Beis Hamikdash. These are all psulim. They're in the animal themselves. And the Gemara is going to explain why we say over here, L'fnei Mishkan Hashem, before we said, Vel Pesach Hayom Mayid, why are we doing different psukim. But anyway, in any case, the psul and all these has nothing to do with the Beis HaMikdash. They're possible even to come near the Beis HaMikdash before that. Bali Mumin, Bein Bali Mumin Kvua and Bein Bali Mumin over in Shekirim B'chutz, Potter. They're both going to be potter if it's a Baal Mum, whether it's permanent or temporary. If Shimnaimer Bali Mumin Kvua and Potter, if it's a permanent Baal Mum, it's potter. Baal Mum and Ayver Chayev B'lo Yisaseh. But there is a lav on a temporary Baal Mum, and we're going to see the Gemara is going to explain what the lav is, and we're going to bring a few other examples of things that are temporary that are going to have the same machlekes. Tayrim Shelo Higia Zmanim. If you have a tour which has to be past a certain age, Ubnei Yoina Sha'avar Zmanim. Bnei Yoina is a young, I think it means a young dove, a young pigeon, that its time has passed. It's only allowed to be to a certain point in its maturity. Past that time, it's no longer a b'nei yaina, it's a full-fledged yaina. Shekriva mechutz, potter. Either of them, if you brought them mechutz, it's potter because it's not zmanim. Shemanayim b'nei yaina shava zmanim, potter. Ein chanami, the one that's past its time is potter, but time shall he get zmanim below say, like you said before, the Tairim Shalohi Giyazmanim, it's only a temporary psul. Eventually they'll be old enough and you could use them. So anything that's a temporary psul, like the Mum Iver, there's a lois essay on bringing it bachot. Oisai v'espenoi, there's a issue, it's a general rule, you're not allowed to shecht an animal together with its child. So on the same day, Umachusar Zman, and animal before it's a week old is not allowed to be brought as a carbon potter. They're potter. This is according to Tanakama, even though these are temporary things, it's still there's no isra on it. Say again, these are both temporary things. That you can't do a mother and its child on the same day. That's only that day, but the next day you could bring it, right? To be permanent, that you can never do a mother and its child. We can never shecht mothers because you can never use any of the children. Whatever is only a temporary problem. There's a loisa say on it, there's a lav, but there's no cars. The Chum say since there's no cars, there's no loisa say as well.
You shech the mother and a child at the same time. There's no loisa say because you're doing it in the base of mikdash.
No. He means the loisa say of no. What he means to say is, if you brought the you're going to be chayiv for the love of the mother, of shechting the mother and the child the same day, but you're not going to be chayiv for shchitas chutz. That's what we're talking about. This mission is focused on shchitas chutz. Yeah. So the shchitas chutz is only on something that's kosher, that you're allowed that's mutter to be shechted. And since it's not mutter to be shechted, and it's a psul, you're not allowed to eat it also. So therefore it's not going to be able to be, it's not a kosher carbon.
So there's essentially two issues, one loisa, one loisa with the chorus.
Well, that's Reb Shimon says, that's Reb Shimon's sheet. He says anything that's only a temporary psul, that you're not allowed to bring it as a carbon now, but tomorrow you could. He says there's a loisa say to bring it bachot. And the Racham say no. If once there's no karos, there's no loisa say either. The Gemara will explain what the loisa say of Reb Shimon is. Where does he get the loisa say from? Mechus zman, bein begufay, bein bebalav. If the animal is a mechus zman begufay, like we said, if it's the first week of the animal's life, you're not allowed to bring it as a carbon. Bein bebalav, the Mishnah itself is going to explain what it means mechus zman bebalav. Ezehu mechus zman bebalav. What does it mean? A mechus zman bebalav hazav v'hazava. So someone who has a tumah of zava, so they can't be mak of the carbon. V'hayeledes. I'm sorry. So these are hazava, and it's not talking about someone who's a zava. Someone who has to bring a carbon because they're a zav or a zava, but they have to wait till the week is up, right? A zav and a zava is tummy for a week. After the week, they have a chiyuv to bring the carbon. If they bring that carbon before the proper time to bring the carbon, before they become tar from their tumah, you're not allowed to bring the carbon, and they brought it early. V'hayeledes has to bring for a boy after 40 days, for a girl after 80 days. V'hametzaira, they also have to wait after the tzaras goes away. Shekrivu chatasam v'hashamam b'chutz, if they brought their chatas and their asham b'chutz, if they did it before the time that they were supposed to bring their carbon, paturim. If they're mechuyev to bring an oil or a shlamim, then if they bring that b'chutz, they're chayiv. The reason is because an oil and a shlamim, if they're not kosher to be brought as the chiyuv for a zav or as the case may be, or a yeledes, they can instead be a nedava. So they're kosher to be brought as a nedava even while they're still tummy. Right? It's being brought by the kayin. So if you do it b'chutz, you're going to be chayiv. The Gemara is going to ask what shlamim are there. We find that there's a chatas and a asham and a oila for these different tumas and chiyuvim, but there's no shlamim. So Dr. Mishnah Vaita, hamal mibsar chatas mibsar asham mibsar kochim. If someone is makriv on the mizbech, he burns on the mizbech, the basar of a chatas that's supposed to be in by kehanim. B'sar asham, it's also supposed to be by kehanim. B'sar kochim or other kochim, which Rashi explained earlier, it's talking about the kifsei atzeres. The b'sar kochim kalim, or the basar of kochim kalim, is supposed to be eaten by the bailim, or moiser or oimer, the leftovers of the oimer, which is eaten by kehanim, shtei alechem, which is eaten by kehanim, alechem aponim, shiri menachas, leftover menachas. These are all eaten by kehanim. All of these things, we're going to say that you're not going to be chayiv to do for the mak of them b'chutz. They're supposed to be eaten by kehanim. They're not supposed to be nikriv on the mizbech. Therefore, if you mak of them, if you burn them on the mizbech, that's not where they were properly supposed to go. So there's no chiyuv of being mal them b'chutz. Now we're going to talk about avodas. The hayotzik, the one who mixes the oil into a you spritz the oil onto the mincha. Va'poises, someone who does the avoid of breaking up the menachas. Va'boilel, he mixes the oil into the flour. V'hamoilech, salts a carbon. V'amenef, he waves the carbon. Hamagish, he brings the mincha close to the mizbeach. V'amasader, sashulchan, he prepares the shulchan with the lechem upon him. V'ametev, v'saneris, he prepares the neris on the menorah. V'hakaimitz, he takes the kaimitz from a mincha. V'makabel daman, and he's makabel dam of a carbon. B'chutz, he does any of these things b'chutz. This is a continuation. We said before, if you were mala from the things that are supposed to be eaten, or he does these avoidus, potter. He's going to be potter for doing it b'chutz. Gemara is going to explain why. If you do any of these things, if he's a zar, and he's not going to be chayiv if he does it, but tumah v'loy mishum mechusa begadim, and now if he does it as a kohen who's not wearing the begadim, v'loy mishum shaloi rachat yadayim reglayim, and not if he did it, where he didn't wash his hands and feet. Let me see this. Rashi says, all these things, if he did the haktara of something that wasn't supposed to go on the mizbeach, and all the avoids that we said, Rashi says, like we said earlier, we said and Yuma, avoid matan avoid silak. You only are chayiv a misa for a zaros, for doing avoida as a zar, if you do the tchilas avoida. I'm sorry, no, the avoida masna v'loy avoida silik, avoida tama v'loy avoida sheyesh achrei avoida. It has to be a final avoida in order to be chayiv misa for doing it bezaros and all these other things, which are also compared in different ways. They are all learned out from zaros. Now we're going to move on. We've mentioned before about the bamas. It's always been a little bit mysterious, right, about this situation with the bamas, that certain times you could do with the bama. What bama? So this mission is going to lay out exactly what the story is with the bamas. Actually, hukam ha-mishkan, until the original mishkan was built in the midbar, when they built the mishkan, right? Moshe Rabbeinu built the mishkan a year after they came out of Mitzrayim. 2 years, they built it a year after, and then they were making it a little less than 2 years after. Hayu habamas mutaris. I think it was 1 year after. The bum, until that point, the people could bring a bama, right? We have all the avos would bring karbanos, they would bring in on a bama. V'avoida b'bchayris, and until that point, the b'chayris did the avoida. It was later, after the egel, that the kahuna was given to the kehanim. Mishkan, when the mishkan was built in the midbar, nesru habamas, the bamas became aser v'avoida v'kehanim. The avoida was done by kehanim. It was switched over from b'chayris to kehanim. Kachem nechal nefnim aklayim, in the mishkan, in the midbar. Kachem were eaten inside of the curtains that surrounded the azara. Kachem kalam b'chol machne Yisrael. Kachem kalam could be eaten anywhere with the yidden. The whole machna was all considered like Yushalayim. It was all, that's where the yidden could eat the kachem kalam. Bola Gilgal, when they came into Eretz Yisrael. So, good morning, Menachem. We're right in the middle of Kuf Yud Beis Amid Beis. We're middle of the Mishnah on Kuf Yud Beis Amid Beis, and we just started talking about the different rules of the bamas that were built, that were the different. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say the bamas. The different tkufas that the yidden had different rules about where they could do the avodah. So the first thing we said is, before the Mishkan was built, they were allowed to use bamas. When they built the Mishkan in the midbar, then they had to do the avodah in the Mishkan. There were no. Then bamas became aser, and you had to do all the avodas in the Mishkan. So now we're up to where they arrived in Eretz Yisrael, which is Bo LeGilgal, which is a little more than halfway down on Kufya Beis Amid Beis. When they arrived in Gilgal, Hutru Habamas. At that point, they had 14 years that the Mishkan, the same Mishkan that was in the Midbar, was in Gilgal. And in those 14 years, the Yidden first 7 years were conquering Eretz Yisrael. And then 7 years after that, they were dividing up the land. So in Gilgal, there was a Mishkan, and Kachim were eaten inside of the Klayim, and Kachim Kal B'chol Makkah. Bo l'Shila, when they came to Shila, Nesru Habamas. The Bamas were Asad. B'loy Hayasham, because that was a temporary, that was the Gilgal was a temporary, didn't have the same status, so you're allowed to have Bamas there. When they came to Shiloh, then the Mishkan was set up there for a very long time, for over 300 years. Nesru Habamas, the Bamas became Asa, V'loy Hayasham Tikra. The Mishkan in Shiloh did not have a roof. It wasn't mamish like the Beis HaMikdash, a permanent structure. Ela Beis Avadim Bilvad, it was a building made out of stone, Milmatan, that was the walls, Vayirias Milmailan, and on top, they had the same Urias that covered the Mishkan in the Midbar, we also covered the Mishkan in the building in Shiloh. V'yaisa Menucha. The Torah says, when you come to Velhal Menucha, Velhal Nachla, Ki levasam ad ata el Menucha Velhal Nachla. So Menucha was Shiloh. The Nachla we're going to see later on was the Beis HaMikdash. Kachim Nechalim, that was when the Yidden were told that when they come to Eretz Yisrael, they're going to come to Menucha and Nachla. So Shiloh was like the first interim Beis HaMikdash. And what was it then? Kachim Nechalim from Naklayim. Kachim had to be eaten in the Azara, just like in the Beis HaMikdash, they had to be eaten inside the curtains, which was similar to the Azara. But Kachim Kalu Ma'aseh Sheni B'chol Haroya. Kachim Kalu Ma'aseh Sheni was not in Yerushalayim, so it doesn't Kachim Kalu and Ma'aseh Sheni are usually in Yerushalayim. It had to be anything within sight of Shiloh. It was sort of like Yerushalayim. Then Shiloh was destroyed, and the Mishkan was brought to Noiv and Given. So at that point, that was more temporary again. Hotru Habamas, Bamas became mutter. Kachim Nechalim Finim Naklayim. Kachim again could be eaten inside of the Klayim of the Mishkan. Kachim Kalim B'chol Ari Yisrael. Kachim Kalim could be eaten anywhere because there was no permanent. It wasn't as permanent the place. It didn't have the din that you had to eat it like you did in Yerushalayim. It was like eating it was like that when there's a Heter Habamas, then there's no rule to eat Kachim Kalim in Yerushalayim. Bayu Yerushalayim, when they came to Yerushalayim, and there was only Kachim Kachim could only be brought. Kachim were either things that you were mechuyev to bring, like a chatas and a asham, or they were karbanos tzibur. The mincha wasn't brought, which is also Kachim, wasn't brought in Bamas. So therefore, the Kachim could only be eaten in the this main Mishkan. Bayu Yerushalayim, when they came to Yerushalayim, they built the Beis HaMikdash, Nesru HaBamas. The Bamas became Asav Loyal and Heter. They never became mutter. This Mishnah obviously seems to hold Kutshel Shaita, Kutshel Asad Lavai. That it became Kaddish. The Mikdash was Kaddish permanently, and therefore Bamas became Asad permanently. V'yayis and Nachla. This is what we said. Al Menucha Val Nachla. When they had the Beis HaMikdash, that was the Nachla. Kachim Nechalim Fnim and Aklayim. Again, in the Beis HaMikdash, Kachim can only be eaten in the walls of the Azara. Kachim Kalam Ma'aseh Sheni Uflim and Achayma. They had to be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim. Kol HaKachim Shekdeshim B'Shas Isser Habamas. If you have Kachim that a person set them aside during a time of Isser Habamas, let's say when Shiloh was around, right? V'Krivan B'Shas Isser Habamas. And then you brought them during the time when Bamas was still Asa. Mibachutz, Harelu, Be'esev Eloisase. B'chayan Ovakaris. That's a full-fledged din of Shchutei Chutz and Malach Chutz. And he's going to be chayiv in an essay and a loisase. Rashi brings the essay and loisase. Where is it? The Torah says you have to bring it to Hashem. The say b'sham tala. The Torah says you should bring it. Where's the pasuk? You may move around that essay. And Yechayev and the Chiv Karis that we learned from the Shchutei Chutz and the Shchutei and the Mala B'chutz, like we learned from the Parsha in the beginning of Vayikra. Hekdishim b'shas heter abas. But what happens if during, let's say, the 14 years that the Mishkan was in Gilgal, so they were allowed to be, at that time, they were allowed to bring a carbon in a bama. And they separated the carbon, they were makdish the carbon, but he delayed, and he first brought the carbon, he first was malit at a time there was asabamas, and he brought it bachutz. Hare'elu be'esei, v'lois he's chayav on esei lois because it's his time of Isra Abamas, so he wasn't allowed to bring it. But during when the Mishkan is in Shiloh, he's no longer allowed to bring it by Obama, but he's not chayiv karos. Like we said before, we had this in the Gemara earlier that those 7 psukim, we said that the iser, the chiyav of bringing it, the pasuk said only the first 5 psukim were talking about peshas iser abamas, peshas heter abamas, and afterwards it switched to heter abamas. So if it was originally set aside b'shas heter abamas, you're not going to have the chiv karos. Hekdeshim b'shas isra abamas. What if you separated in time of isra abamas? V'kriv b'shas heter abamas, and he brings it at the time of heter abamas. Hare'elu be'esei ve'ein bahem lo esasei. He was mavatal esei because the Torah says you should bring it to the lifnim, and he could have brought it. So when he was makdash b'sas isra abamas, he had a chiyuv to bring it lifnim, and he didn't do so. And he waited till the shas heter abamas. So he was mavatal the essay that said he had to do it lifnim. Ve'elu kachim kreiven b'mishkan. These are the kachim that are brought in the Mishkan. Kachim shehukta shula Mishkan. Those kachim that have to be, these have to be brought in the Mishkan. Those are those that were hukdash to be brought in the Mishkan. What are that? Karbanos tzibur. A carbon tzibur has to be brought in the Mishkan. It can't be brought on a bum. So karbanos tzibur kreiven b'mishkan. But karbanos hayachid b'bum. Karbanos yachid can be brought on a bum. Karbanos hayachid shehukta shula Mishkan. Those karbanos yachid that have to be brought in the Mishkan, yakivu b'mishkan. They have to be born in the Mishkan, and we're going to explain that means, that means Rashi says it means if he made a t'nai that he said I'm going to bring it in the Mishkan, he's mechuyev to bring it to the Mishkan. But if he does it outside, even though he was over on his shvuah, he made a neder. He said I'm bringing this carbon, I'm bringing an oilas nedava that I really could bring on a bama, but I'm choosing to say that I want to bring it on the Mishkan. If he then brings it outside of the Mishkan, he's not over for shchutei chutz. He's over for violating his word. He said he's going to do it in the Mishkan. He didn't do so, but doesn't make it into shchutei chutz. What is the difference of the rules of a bamas yachid, meaning the bamas tzibur is in Noiv the Givain or in Gilgal, these places where you were allowed to bring karbanos tzibur as opposed to the bamas yachid. There were also rules that were different than bamas yachid. You don't have in a bamas yachid smicha ushchitas tzafon. There's no din of being saimach your hands, of leaning on the carbon, and the din of shchitas tzafon that you for an oila is supposed to be kachim are supposed to be brought in. They're supposed to be slaughtered in the tzafon of the mizbeach. Because there is no azara, there's no tzafon of the mizbeach. There might not even be a mizbeach. Umat and saviv, you don't spritz the dam around shtaim sheim arba on the mizbeach. Utnufa, you don't wave the carbon. V'hagasha, you don't bring the mincha close to the mizbeach. If Yehuda Aimer, ein mincha b'bama. He says there's no mincha at all in the bama, so not even relevant to say there's no hagasha because you don't bring the mincha in a bama at all. And in addition, So we said there's no hagasha. Rabbi Yehuda was being chaylik. He said wasn't a mincha altogether. We're continuing with the things that you don't have in a bama. V'kiyan, there's no requirement that a kayan do the avodah by a bama. Or big day sharis seems to go along with it, and therefore there's no big day sharis. You don't wear the big day kahuna. Or klei sharis, you don't use a klei sharis when you do the avodah by a bama. V'reyach nichayach is also not the din in the Mishkan, in the Beis HaMikdash. When you bring a carbon, when you burn let's say an oila, you're not allowed to first cook it somewhere else. You have to have the reach nechayach. You have to have the smell from burning it on the mizbeach. But in a bama, you could pre-cook it before you put it on the mizbeach. Umchitza, there's also not a differentiation between the top and the bottom of the mizbeach as far as being zarek the damim. Berichat shadayim raglayim. There's no requirement that before doing the avodah you have to wash your hands and feet. Aval hazman v'hanois v'atomei shavim b'zeh b'zeh. The din that you can't have a machshavas chut for zmanai, and the isser if you leave it over past the zman, and eating the noiser, and if something was left over past its zman, or eating kacham that became tomei, that is also found by your bum. Okay. Let's go into the Gemara. Zok the Gemara. The first thing we said in the Mishnah was that if you eat a para aduma outside of its hole, you're not going to be chayiv for chutz. My chutz megisa. What does it mean you eat the para aduma outside of its hole? Amar shlokish chutz me'akom habadakla. Outside of the place that was checked for it to make sure that there's no mason underneath it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'lei kol eretz Yisrael beduki. The whole Eretz Yisrael we're not choishish for mason. As we're going to see, it's a machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says that the whole Eretz Yisrael, there were no mason that came there during the Mabel, and therefore we don't have to worry about mason. And Rabbi Rish Lakish says you do have to check. Elam Rabbi Yochanan, so what does it mean outside of its hole? It means he did it close to Yerushalayim. The din is that the paraduma has to be burnt outside of the Chaimis Yerushalayim, and he did it inside. But even so, that's not considered shchutei chutz or halal b'chutz. Let's say, why does it have to be that he did it within the chayma? Let's say he did it outside the chayma, but he just didn't do it opposite the oil mayid. If you do it shloik keneged Pesach, you shech shloik keneged Pesach. It's also nema b'shachar b'hizeh ma'azok keneged Pesach. Af shchitas shloik keneged Pesach. Just like the azah has to be keneged Pesach, the shchitos has to be keneged Pesach. Pritema dolei makish. If you'll say Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold of this akish or itmar, we'll skip the parentheses, even though it really helps a little bit. So if you burn it, Rabbi Yochanan said it's possible. And we made in the parentheses, we also said Vesara Fehiza, we said Veshachad Vehiza. So Rabbi Yochanan clearly holds of this Hakish. All it means is that wherever it went, even if it left the place where you shechted it and it died somewhere else, there you could burn it. So we see Rabbi Yochanan is the manam who does hold of the Gzeir Shava of Hazah. So he does hold that it has to be connected at Pesach. So why does Rabbi Yochanan say? Why does he have to say it's l'fnim and achayim? Why can he say it's like connected Pesach? It's not just talking. Rabbi Yochanan was saying not just chutz l'chayma. One might have thought he wants to say bedafka the chiddush of l'fnim and achayim, because one might say if you're chayiv shchutei that you're not when you do it outside of the chayma, which is further away, alafil l'fnim and achayim the krubi karva maybe it's kosher to do the paraduma within the chayma. The Torah says you do it outside of the chayma, it's going to be kosher. Certainly, if you do it inside the chayma, kamash will no. And when the Torah says do it outside the chayma, that is bedafka. It can't be lefnim in a chayma. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, but kol Eretz Yisrael beduki. Rabbi Yochanan said that whole Eretz Yisrael does not have mason. But my committee, what's the machlokes based on? Marsav a yard mabel Eretz Yisrael, or Marsav a lo yard. One Madama says the Babel brought all the mason to Eretz Yisrael, and the other one says it didn't bring the mason. They're all coming from the same pasuk. Ben Adam Amala At. Ben Adam says At Eretz Yisrael loy mitayrehi loy gushma b'yom zam. Eretz Yisrael is loy mitahira, it's not cleaned out. The loy gushim b'yom zam, but it did not get inundated on the day of anger. So they darshan this psak in two ways. Rabbi Yechon savar tmuya mitamakra. The pasuk is asking a question. Eretz Yisrael milay mitahira, as kula at, is Eretz Yisrael not tar? Klum yardol of gsham b'yom zam. Did the gshamim go into Eretz Yisrael on the day of anger, meaning during the Mabul? No, it didn't. So Rabbi Yechon says, therefore, there were no mesim from the Mabul in Eretz Yisrael. Shlokas shava kapashte. He reads it straight. Eretz loy mitayra. At. It's a land that's not tar. Milo yado lech gsham b'yom zam. Did the gshamim not go on it? It did have the gshamim, and therefore it did become tummy. Eser shlokas. Now we're going to have a blot, an avid, about questions about this machlekes. Rabbi Yechanan says that the Mabul brought mesim to Eretz Yisrael, and Rish Lakish says it did. The Rish Lakish says it did bring mesim. Rabbi Yechanan says it didn't. Eser Rish Lakish Rabbi Yechanan. Rish Lakish asks Rabbi Yechanan, who says that there were no mesim in Eretz Yisrael. Chatzeros hayu b'shalayim b'nuya ala sela. There were when they would make the para aduma, they had special courtyards in Shalayim that were built on rock, v'tachtein chalul, and they had an opening of a tefach, and they kever tahayim in order to stop tumah from coming up from the tahayim, from any mesim underneath a space of a tefach intersects between tumah. Or via nashim mubaris, they would bring women who were expecting the eldest, they would give birth in that chotzer megadlish sham b'neim. They would bring up the children in the chotzer, never leaving the para in order to do the avodah of the para. Maybe in shvarim they would bring oxen valgabe and dalasas, and there would be doors on there. They would carry doors that there'd be a space underneath the doors. With Tinokas Yoshvan Alain, they'd have these children that were brought up in Tyra sitting on them, shall ever be on with stone kaisis that cannot be makabel tuma in their hands. Umalu, they would fill up with water, v'yashubim kaiman, and they would go back onto the wagons. They did all these things to make sure that these children should not become tameh from tuma that might be underneath. So you see that there is tuma underneath, not like Rabbi Yechon. Rav Huna Breder Yeshua, Ma'ala also b'para. There was a special milo they did with the para, since the chachamim were makel. They would argue with the tzdukim. The tzdukim said that at full yom can't do the avodah of the para, so they would bedafki use it till yom. So since they were makel in that, they were machmer and all these things, even though it wasn't really necessary. Eser Rabbi Yechon Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yechon asked Rish Lakish, Pam echad matzu atzmas b'lishkas dir ha'etzim. They one time found bones in the lishkas dir ha'etzim. Bikshu ligzar tamal Yushalayim. They wanted to, because everyone in Yushalayim should be treated as tamei because of the appearance that they found bones in the gear. Amar Rabbi Yeshua al Ragla. Rabbi Yeshua stood up and said, "Va'amar loy bushu klimehi lanu shenigzar tamal lir avosenu ayei meisei mabel ayei meisei nevuchanetzer." From the Rabbi Yeshua said that it's terrible thing that we have to be geyser tumah on the ear because of these bones that we found. We don't even have the meisei mabel, we don't have the meisei nevuchanetzer, and now we have to be geyser tumah. The fact that he's saying that there's no meisei mabel and there's no meisei from the massacres of Nebuchadnezzar, Weistais, that there were no mesim from the mabel. In fact, so you're saying there were no mesim of Nebuchadnezzar. We know Nebuchadnezzar killed many people. You must say that there were mesim of Nebuchadnezzar, but they were cleaned out because it was Yerushalayim. Everyone knew you had to clean it out. So Rizal will say also, even though it says there were no mesim from the mabel, it means because they were there and they cleaned it out. In fact, the Mari Afni, if they were cleaned out, so then Takar L'chayra Rabbi Yochanan is right that there were no meisei mabel, so you shouldn't have to worry about mesim. So it was only cleaned out for Yerushalayim, it wasn't cleaned out from the rest of Eretz Yisrael, so therefore you have to worry about mesim. Some say they brought this as a kasha Rish Lakish on Rabbi Yochanan. Yes, it says where the meisei mabel, where the meisei nevuchadnezzar. Ne'etzar. They were gathered and taken away. My lam and the hani hava hani nami havi. For the fact that the meisei nevuchadnezzar were there and gathered up, so too the meisei mabel. So no, the meisei nevuchadnezzar were gathered up. The meisei mabel never came, like Rabbi Yochanan. Esrei. Michol asher b'charava mesu. It says that everything that was on dry ground died. Bishlam aludidi, I mean a yarad mabel Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Shlokish says, according to me, that I say the mabel did come to Eretz Yisrael, bringing mesim with it. Misham hachi mesu. That's why that which was on the dry land died. Alidach amai mesu. What killed the people in the animals and the people in Eretz Yisrael? Zaktamar misham havla. It was not from the water. They still died in Eretz Yisrael, even though there was no water in Eretz Yisrael, according to Rabbi Yochanan. They died from the heat. There was a heat that came up and killed them. They were over in Arayas, which is considered Roischan. It causes heat, and they died by heat as well. They were judged in heat. It says over here, by the mabel, the water receded. The anger of the king cooled down. So you see that they needed to cool down, see that the waters were very hot. Some say Rabbi Yochanan asked Rishon, everything that was dry land died. Can understand where there was dry land, because the mabel never came to Yisrael. So that died through this heat. What does it mean? The way anything was on dry land, there was no dry land. So like we all understood it, everything that was previously on dry land, the mabel killed it out. There was no gzeira on the dogim in the ocean. When it says Mikol Asher B'Charava Mesu, it's telling you that the dogim did not die with the mabel. So tomorrow, according to the mandama that says that the mabel never came to Israel, Hainu de Kam Rima. Rima is a very large animal that couldn't fit on the table, like we're going to see. So that's where it stayed. It stayed in Eretz Yisrael. Hasam. Alamanda Ama Yarad Rima. According to the mandama Yarad, that the mabel did come to Israel. Rima Heicha come. Where did the Rima survive? Amrav Yanei Guria Sechnisu B'Teva. They brought the baby Rima into the teva. Or Zila the Rima Basyuma. I saw a 1-day-old Rima. Vahavi Kahari Tavar. It was the size of Har Tavar. Vahar Tavar Kamahavi. What's the size of Har Tavar? Aboam Parsi Mashcha the Tzavara. 40. Aboam Parsi. It was 40 parses wide, which is a huge amount. Mashcha Tzavara plus a parsi, and the length of its neck was 3 parsim. Mavasa the Reisha Parsa Upalga, and the width of its head was 1.5 parsa. Rama Kava V'Sacha Yardana, when it gave its waist, it would plug up, it would dam the Yarden. So it was too large to go in the Teva. It didn't actually, it wasn't all saved, it was just its head went to the Teva to save it. In fact, we said that its head was a parsa and a half, which is too big to go in the teva. It only stuck its nostril into the teva. But Rabbi Yochanan says that the mabel didn't go to Yisrael. So what does it mean? So how could Rabbi Yochanan be the mandam? Rabbi Yochanan says it wasn't necessary. The Rima could have just stayed in Eretz Yisrael. He was just answering according to Reish Lakish. How could this ram save itself by sticking its nose in the teva? But the teva was moving.
What about the heat?
We're going to ask that. We're going to ask that in a second. You're correct. The Amar Reish Lakish kind of kashru b'teva. Its horns were tied onto the teva. And so how could the Ra'im survive in that heat of the water? How did the teva itself survive? It was made with like a pitch smeared on the outside. If it was boiling water, it would have boiled away the protective coating of the teva. How did Oig Melech HaBashan survive? We all know Oig Melech HaBashan held on to the teva, and that's how he survived. The tzeda itself was protected with a nace, that it was cool, and the area around it was also cool, and that's how the Reim and Oig Melech HaBashan survived. Ushim Lakish Nehi Nami di Yarad Mabel Eretz Yisrael. According to Rish Lakish, that the Mabel did go to Eretz Yisrael. Valei Pash. But even if the Mabel came there, but the Mason didn't stay there. The Amr Shlakish Lama Nikra Shma Metzula. Why is Babel called Metzula? Shchol Mason Mabel Stalusham. That all the Mason Mabel drifted there. Rabbi Yechon Amr Lama Nikra Shma Shinar. Why is it called Shinar? Shchol Mason Mabel Ninurusham. They all floated there. But still, there was some that were left behind. Just one more thing. Why is Babel called Shinar? Shinara Ashiris. Sheminara is Ashiris. It expels Ashirim. The Ashirim lose their Ashirs. Because in the Havel, but we see there are many Ashirim in Babel. Plus a Dora de Mashke. They don't keep it for more than 3 days. Ravami kala oichel mi afresh Babel. Whoever eats from the dust of Babel, kilo oichel basar avoisav. According to Rish Lakish, that the Mesim end up there. So I'm sorry, no. According to everyone, the Mesim all ended up in Babel. So when you eat from the basar of Babel, it has the Mesim of the people from the Dara Mabel. All the animals also came there. So when you eat, it's as if you're eating shkatzim urumasim. Yasher kayach, and got a lot done today.
I was waiting for a basic question. When the Mason there, it's